Green Calgary, as we've said a few times, was founded back in 1978, and we've really morphed as environmental issues became more intense and diversified. Like the Canadians you'll see in the film tonight, Green Calgary strongly believes that Calgary's environmental challenge will take a community approach. We're going to need individuals, families, neighborhoods, and businesses to be part of the solution.
This came out from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change a couple months ago. These are the projections for climate change out to the year 2100. The left figure is an aggressive climate policy where we get climate change in check and our carbon emissions only lead to about a 2-degree warming globally over the next 100 years. On the right is a do-nothing scenario. And if you take a look at the scale on the bottom, in the Arctic, in the next 100 years, we could see a warming by 10 to 11 degrees Celsius. Again, unprecedented, unfathomable. The Arctic is connected to all of us, and this will cause immense challenges for everybody, not just residents in these places.
So, what is the challenge that we face today? Human beings, very suddenly, have become a powerful force that is shaping the properties of the planet. There's never been a single species able to affect the physical, chemical, and biological features of the planet as we are doing today. We have become a geological force. And that's why scientists today, geologists, are calling this the Anthropocene epoch, the time when humans now have become a force affecting the geological history of this planet. How did we get here? How did we get to this powerful position? Well, I'm a geneticist, as Ian said, and I've been amazed at the way geneticists can use DNA now, the genetic material, to trace the movement of human beings across the planet. And all of the trails lead back to Africa 150,000 years ago. And if you try to imagine the world as it was when our species appeared, if you've ever been to the Serengeti, the Serengeti today is nothing like what it must have been 150,000 years ago. The Serengeti must have been filled with animals in abundance and diversity beyond anything we imagine today. And here and there, you'd have to look hard to see little pockets of 3, 4, or 5 of these funny-looking, two-legged, furless apes. And that was us. Now, I don't think any species looked at us and went, shh, don't disturb him, he's going to take over the planet. I mean, we weren't very impressive. We weren't very big. We weren't fast. We weren't strong. There weren't many of us. How the hell did this naked ape get to be the dominant animal on the planet? Well, of course, the answer is our secret was invisible. It was a 2-kilogram organ buried deep in the human skull. And it was that organ that gave us an advantage over all of the other species that occupied their living space. That brain enabled us to invent. We were curious. We were very inventive. We had a massive memory. We learned from what we experienced. And over time, we remembered that knowledge and passed it on. And that human brain did something no other species has ever done. We invented an idea called the future. No other animal has a sense of the future as we do. Well, the future doesn't exist. The only thing that's real is today, what we know now, and what we remember from the past. But because we invented this notion of a future, we are the only animal that realized we can affect the future by what we do today. Based on our experience and knowledge, we can look ahead and we can see where the possible dangers lie, where the opportunities are. And we can deliberately act today to avoid the dangers and to exploit the opportunities. I believe foresight, that ability to look ahead, was the great advantage that we had that enabled us to go through 150,000 years of evolution and become the dominant animal on the planet. And now we've got the amplified brain power of scientists. We've got supercomputers. And for over 40 years, the leading scientists of the world have been telling us we are headed down a very dangerous path, that there are huge opportunities at changing direction and following a different path. And now we're turning our backs on the very strategy that got us here today, the strategy of foresight. We say, nah, you guys don't know what you're doing. You hear that science is junk on climate is junk science, that these guys are just interested in getting more money, that they lie. All of this, much of it, sponsored by the fossil fuel industry. But we are turning our backs then on the very strategy for survival and success of our species. Why is that? Why are we turning our backs? It's not just the propaganda from the fossil fuel industry that's doing that. I think it's something far more fundamental. For 95% of human existence, we were nomadic hunter-gatherers. We had to carry everything we owned on our backs, and we followed animals and plants through the seasons. When you're a nomadic hunter-gatherer, you know you're a part of nature. You know that you're utterly dependent for your well-being and survival on nature. 10,000 years ago, we underwent this massive change in the way that we live when we discovered the agricultural revolution, that if you plant a seed, it'll grow into something you can eat or use. So that changed the course of human history and enabled what we recognize as civilization to take place. In 1900, there were 1.6 billion people in the world, but only 14 cities with more than 1 million people. The vast majority of people in the world still lived in rural village communities because 80% of us were farmers or involved in some aspect of agriculture. So when you live in a rural village community where agriculture is a dominant activity, you know very well that weather and climate are absolutely critical for your well-being and survival as a farmer. You understand the amount of snow in the winter is directly related to the amount of moisture in the soil in the summer. Farmers know that insects are critical to pollinate flowering plants. Farmers know that certain species of plants will take nitrogen from the air and fix it as fertilizer in the soil. Farmers understand that we are utterly dependent in and immersed in nature. But a remarkable change has taken place in the last 100 years. There were 1.6 billion of us and 14 cities in 1900. In only 100 years, now we had 6 billion people, but over 400 cities with more than 1 million people. In a country like Canada, 80 to 85% of us now live in big cities. And in a big city, the way you look at the world changes. In a big city, we think, well, as long as we have parks where we can go and play and camp, who needs nature? In a city, our highest priority becomes our jobs. You need a job to earn the money to buy the things you want. And so the economy comes to take a dominant position in our priorities and on our agendas. And I think that's been the fundamental shift that has disconnected us from the natural world, and where we find that we operate within an economic paradigm that ultimately has proved to be incredibly destructive. So the challenge to us is ultimately to change and recognize what human beings have known for 99% of our existence, change our perspective in realizing that we are a part of nature.
Patricia, you've seen the film now, and you've also experienced and been through Calgary's experience. And maybe do you see kind of interconnections and any kind of thoughts on how this connects to this region and how we can respond?
Very strongly. I mean, the people speaking, your heart just goes out to them. And to see them pull together and seeing that they're going to need to address this. And that's what we need to do in Calgary. Each one of us can do small things in our home, and if we harness the power of our neighbors and our friends, and many, many thousands of us are part of the solution, that's where the hope is. And so it was a hopeful film in that way, and it also puts a human face on it. I think the statistics are sobering. Reading about the impacts that go far beyond just water and include things like the poisons in the air and the earth and the amazing amounts of plastics that are flowing and now powdering into our land and our water, animals and that kind of thing. It's overwhelming, and it becomes whelming when we got friends and community and we're working together and we're in action. So I made a lot of connections with them, and I was happy to see the faces of fellow Canadians who are taking on this challenge in their communities.
Thank you. And David, we're here in Calgary. You know, we're in a place where there's been huge impacts as a result of climate change, but on the national scene, this is a critical place politically in terms of the response, not just on the regional level, but on a national and global level. And do you want to, speak to your thoughts on Alberta and its place in the national kind of dialogue?
As I was watching the film, I thought, gee, if I was a Calgarian sitting here looking at that, I might think, gosh, are we ever lucky we don't live on the ocean? I think, there would be a sense, well, that's a maritime problem. But of course, there are impacts you're feeling here as well. And it's inevitable that all across this country, we're going to feel impacts. But Calgary, I think, has a very special role in the sense that you're at the heart now of what is one of the problems, which is the way that we're using energy and the way our economy is dependent on that. So I think at the very least, we ought to be talking about our energy future and the way we're going to exploit energy and how that ties into the economy. But that discussion hasn't even been going on. At the municipal level across this country, from Okotoks to Calgary to Edmonton to Vancouver, we're seeing incredible things going on. That's what gives me the hope and a sense that we're really moving in the right direction at the municipal level. We need bigger decisions that are going to have to be done at the provincial and the federal level. And certainly, I have found it very difficult to gain access to your provincial political leaders here, because there is that commitment to energy without regard to the bigger picture. And I think Alberta definitely needs a discussion about how energy is going to play in the future of this province. I've always said, I've been told to stay the hell out. I'm not an Albertan. And I would take that advice. I say to Albertans, you can do any damn thing you want. Have all the coal burning plants you want. Develop the tar sands as much as you want. All of that stuff. As long as you keep the air, water, and soil in Alberta, do whatever you want. But of course, Alberta is not separate. We're all connected. So the issue is not a limited provincial one. The important challenge is to confront the challenge that we face and get on with finding solutions. So I urge Calgarians, as part of Canada, as part of the world, to raise this issue and say we've got to look at our energy policies, our strategies, in a broader context. And we've got to get on with that right away.
I'm going to ask one final question that came in at the question booth, and it was about climate change and how we instigate that behavioral change, how we directly start to influence how people act. And I think I'm going to throw that to the whole panel. What are some ideas and actions that can shift that behavior? You've mentioned it, David, but what are maybe some things that you can think of within your own kind of respective fields on how we get that behavioral change individually but beyond?
I'm going to speak personally here as to how I ended up on this stage. This all started for me. I always kind of knew about it. And then I read Tim Flannery's book a couple of years ago, 2006, I think it came out, and I got scared. I got really scared. And I basically started waking up in the middle of the night, 3 in the morning. I've got a 6-year-old and I got an 8-year-old, and I would lie in bed in a cold sweat. I don't know if anybody else has had that experience. It's, when you look at what we're up against, it's very frightening. And then about 2 years ago, I started getting involved, and I started working on this as a coalition of people. But I felt empowered, and I started writing things, and I started talking to people, and I started getting my community involved. And suddenly, I'm sleeping through the night. I have a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old. I worry about their future, but I'm working on their future. So somehow we have to take that fear, which I think is a really important motivator, because I don't think we're going to do this. People talk about, well, the fear paralyzes. Well, we have to figure out how to take that paralysis and make it work for us. So how do we, I ask you guys, how are we going to motivate you to walk out of this room? You're happy to pay $30 and come and see David Suzuki talk, but how are we going to get you to talk to your MLA tomorrow morning, to call the premier tomorrow and say, you know what, we don't want coal-fired power. We want climate change on the agenda. If 700 people do that tomorrow, if every one of you calls Premier Hancock's office tomorrow and say, I want something done about this, something's going to get done. So we need to move, we need to empower people. That's all I have to say.
So in my earlier remarks, I was talking about Green Calgary's specialty, which is moving people into action. And one step leads to another, as I know very well. I got into the hands of Green Calgary, and before you know it, composting up a storm, making all of my own non-toxic cleaners, harvesting rain, and it feels good. I think our commercialization, they want to keep us drowning in products. Just one more product will make you incredibly beautiful and happy. Just keep buying them. And you find that you can do without products, and that the idea that the green lifestyle is either some kind of rarefied Martha Stewart thing that costs too much money, or a life of nothing but nubbly socks and Birkenstocks and suffering. It is a lie. A green life is being connected with people first, experiential living, not sitting in front of a television being sold things. It's about making things, and there's a reason do-it-yourself is becoming a revolution. People love it. I also take hope in the fact that things have changed during my lifetime. It wasn't always like this. There's a lot of young people in the room today that were born after water, came in bottles, right? Those things have a huge impact on our land, but they're now finding that, reusable containers are just as good. So here in Calgary, Green Calgary is a wonderful path to action. We meet people where they are with their interests, and we'd like to move you into action on whatever issues you're passionate about, and we're community-based. So that's our small solution, and I always go back to Joanna Massey, an amazing eco-warrior, and she said, in action, there is hope. And when we're just sitting there knowing that this is happening to our world and doing nothing, it is hopeless. So I really encourage everyone here to take the next step. Thank you.
Let's go to another question.
David, would you care to speak about the issue of putting a price on carbon?
That's obvious, but I think the problem for me is this. We're constantly talking about the triple bottom line, the economy, society, and the environment. And we want, we usually draw them as circles of equal size, and they overlap. And that intersection where all three overlap is the sweet spot. That's where we focus so that we benefit the economy, the environment, and society. This is the dumbest thing I have ever heard. Are we saying the economy is as important as the environment, the same size? That the economy is as important as society? That's crazy. The way I think of it is there's one great big circle called the biosphere. That's a zone of air, water, and land where all life exists. Within that, you have 5 to 10 million circles of varying size. And they overlap in various ways. These are the species that occupy the biosphere. But one of those circles within the biosphere is 40% of that circle. That's us. We are now capturing 40% of the net primary productivity of the planet. That's all of the energy captured by plants as photosynthesis. We're now taking over. And we are way too big because as our circle keeps growing, we need more and more space, and we're driving more and more species to extinction. I think it's crazy to think of this idea of a triple bottom line where the economy has equal importance.
We've got an outstretched hand over here, yep.
This is a question for you, David. One of the interesting movements that's happened that I guess is most popularized by Bill McKibben is around this whole idea of the carbon bubble and stranded assets. And so he's come up with these three numbers to stay below 2 degrees in terms of global temperature rise, average temperature rise, that we only have 565 gigatons of carbon left in the carbon budget, after which we go beyond the red line.
Thank you for raising those numbers and the issue. Canada, along with all of the other countries at Copenhagen, agreed we must limit temperature rise in this century to 2 degrees. And as McKibben rightly points out, once you make that commitment, we know by the laws of physics exactly how much more carbon we can add to the atmosphere before we pass that 2 degree rise, and that's 565 gigatons of carbon. Now that number doesn't mean a damn thing to me, but 565 gigatons is what physics dictates we must not exceed. And as was pointed out, in the known reserves, we have 5 times that much. So if we are serious about this commitment, 80% of what we've got has got to be left in the ground. So, I mean, the whole question is, how serious are we about this?
I have to reiterate that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change basically said the same thing. You're not just hearing David Suzuki's perspective on this. The global scientific community is in agreement that this is the strategy that is required. This is the top scientists in the world banding together saying we are at a critical moment here, people, and this is the kind of, your numbers were absolutely right on in terms of the question, and these are the realities that we face, and we have some serious decisions, and interestingly that comes down to a very serious conversation in Calgary.